Welcome to AgencyRise, the podcast where digital marketing agencies rise together. I'm your host, Chris Rudolph. I've spent the last decade coaching digital agency founders, helping them scale, systemize operations, and break free from the day-to-day grind. On this podcast, we talk about what really moves the needle for agencies: getting clients, building a team, creating systems, productivity, focus, and freedom. So no hype here, no guru nonsense, just real conversations from the agency trenches. So today's guest is Tudor Tudor Dumitrescu, founder and CEO of TANDA Digital. With offices in New York, London, and Bucharest, TANDA Digital is a leading outbound growth specialist helping B2B firms grow their sales pipeline. Recently, TANDA Digital has been named the world's #1 outbound growth partner for agencies in news outlets such as USA Today, and having helped an impressive number of over 250 digital agencies escape the referral trap and grow consistently through outbound systems. So, Tudor, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, Chris, and thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem. For those who may not be familiar with you, tell us a little bit more about you and your agency.
I mean, I've been in the agency world pretty much from the very beginning. I got my start initially as a freelance direct response copywriter, which is sort of my initial skill set and what I came with. I got to a point where I was working with some clients initially and I was writing their copy, but they wanted more. Their developer team was fully booked with projects that they already had in-house, and they needed somebody to build out the funnel for them. And that's sort of how it morphed into the first agency that I built, Tanda Copywriting. So I scaled Tanda Copywriting to a team of 18 people. Everything was going great. I was, though, because from the very beginning, I didn't have a network, I didn't have connections, I didn't have the advantage of location. I started the Tanda Copywriting from Romania at that time. So pretty much the only reliable channel that I could use was outbound. And I got really good at it. That's how I grew that first agency. And I realized at some point that the other agency friends that I had made in the world who were also running their own agencies, they pretty much got all their clients just from referrals and their network. And this was a big problem for many of them because they were telling me like, Tudor, look, we want to scale, but we can't because it's like we're at full capacity, or we're unsure if we can add a new team member because we don't have the clients, and so on. And they didn't really know how to do outbound and how to sell agency services through outbound. So that's sort of how Tanda Digital was born, which is the second agency that I built, the one that we're talking about today. And obviously, we have expanded beyond just working with agencies, but agencies have been our bread and butter just because of my background. And that's sort of what we started with, the first niche that we started with. And there are several bigger agencies than us when it comes to doing outbound at the moment, but none are bigger in the agency space. And the expertise that we've developed in the agency space, I believe, is very valuable because the agency space is very crowded. There is little differentiation amongst most companies, and it's a very good training ground for out. Because if you can master this one, then the other ones are going to be much easier when it comes to, for example, working with a SaaS company, because there the differentiation is built into the product. They have product market fit. They have all these things. But agencies, very often, they're creative people and they just don't have this. And it's much more of a challenge because, as we were speaking a bit earlier, it's like you can't reach out just saying, for example, we do branding and design and expect the company to just want to speak with you. Because if their level of awareness of the value of branding and design is already that high, they're probably already speaking with other companies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm curious, what are some signs that an agency should look into, outbound, outreach? I know that a lot of different, yeah, they should, like some symptoms or some reasons why that would make sense.
Yeah. So I would say that there's two of them mainly. So when it comes to outreach, you have several channels that you can use. As an agency, we specialize in LinkedIn and cold email. There's obviously others in terms of Facebook outreach, Instagram, and so on. They're a bit different. We work mainly with the B2B side. So I would say that there's sort of two criteria when outbound is going to be good for you. One, you sell to a B2B target audience. If that's the case, then it's good because you're usually going to have the lifetime value, which is the second criterion that's required. That's necessary to sustain outbound. So usually you want to be able to have projects that are worth $15,000 or more in a year. So that's sort of the minimum, let's say, yearly lifetime value, let's call it, that you want to have to be able to use outreach. If the lifetime value that you have with your clients is below 15,000, then outreach is probably not going to be a good channel because it's just going to be too expensive. When you run
Mm,
ads, for example, you pay the cost of ads, but outreach is very people intensive. And a lot of people don't realize this. They think, oh, it's just about setting up some automation on LinkedIn or something of that sort. It's not really the way it works, especially for agencies. I would say that the biggest thing that agencies need to solve is to actually craft what I call a commercial narrative. Most agencies are not aware of what this means, but basically this means that the vast majority of your target market, they're not aware of the value of your service, whatever you're selling to them as an agency is. If they were aware of it, they would already be buying it, and likely not from you
interesting.
because they probably haven't heard of it. So they're unaware of it. What they're aware of are different problems and symptoms of those problems that they're experiencing. So you need to connect with them around that problem, and you need to have a narrative that connects that problem with your expertise. Okay, because that's how you create value. We call that a commercial narrative. I would say that that's sort of the first thing you need to create. And obviously, that requires working with a consultant or somebody who has that expertise and can help you create that. And that's just the starting place. After that, obviously, you need an expert when it comes to setting up the infrastructure, which is very technical, to ensure, for example, on email that it lands in the inbox, that they're going to see it, and that it's going to work at scale. You need somebody to actually prospect the market. There's a lot of technology nowadays that can help you, but often that technology is going to need to be verified. So in our case, all our lists are manually and humanly verified to make sure that the prospects that we select are a perfect fit for our clients. Then apart from that, you need obviously copywriting talent, which goes back to my initial expertise, right? I was trained as a copywriter. You
Mhm.
need copywriting talent to take your commercial narrative and translate it into sequences of emails, LinkedIn messages, and so on that can be used to start conversations with your prospects. And you need an SDR. An SDR is basically somebody who is going to, after the conversations are initiated, is going to carry them on, qualify the prospect, and book them on your calendar. So it's very people intensive, right? Like that's
Cool.
the big problem that most people don't realize. It's not some quick thing that you can just set up and it's going to run for you and it's going to print clients, right?
Yeah, no,
That's
that's
not
I
how it
think that's a
works.
really good point, an important thing for, agency folks to remember is, like, I think kinda in the day of AI, that we're in, we're getting conditioned to want the easy button and just be able to,
Yeah.
push a button or, like, have things automated, but, that's really interesting that you talk about the technology plus human interaction being a big part of the process. What are some things that are working really well in cold outreach for agencies that you can think of?
hmm So when you're asking for things that are working really well, are you asking for campaign structures? Are you asking for types of sequences that work well, or what exactly, or more specifically, are you asking for?
Yeah, yeah, maybe like some different types of, yeah, like sequences or calls to action or anything around there.
Yeah, so I mean, as I was saying previously, you have to start from the commercial narrative that you created. So I can give you a specific example. So one of the most common clients that we work with are branding and design agencies. In the case of branding and design agencies, project values tend to be quite large. So they start somewhere at around 15 to 20,000 USD per project, and they go up to 2,000 or more USD for a single project.
Mhm.
So they're quite extensive, which makes them ideal for outbound. And in their case, I'll give you an example. For example, with FMCG, that's fast moving consumer goods. Those are chocolate bars, drinks, stuff like that. These agencies would work, for example, on the entire brand, but also on the packaging. And if you were to just reach out with an email, let's say saying that, have you thought about or have you considered redoing your branding or stuff like that, you're going to see no success at all pretty much, because as I was saying earlier, the companies that are aware that branding is their bottleneck are already solving it, right? They're not waiting for your email to actually go ahead and solve it. So you
Okay.
need to reach out to the people who have the problem and for whom branding could be a solution, but they're not aware of it yet. right?
Mhm.
And that's the challenge. So how do you do that? The way I like to explain this is that if you think about your market, so to speak, most companies in that market are not aware of the causes of their problems and the pains that they're experiencing. Right. And this is sort of very intuitive because if you're aware of what's causing your pain, you would move instantly to actually solve it. But most of them are not. That's why they're not doing anything about it because they don't realize that it's a pain. They don't realize that it's significant enough. They don't realize the consequences that go or move out of it and so on. So a clear example in the FMCG market, for example, is tying into something like ad costs going up. If you're going to connect with a CMO at one of those FMCG companies, that's sort of top of their mind nowadays for them. That's a downstream effect, as we call it, that's produced by lack of distinctiveness in their brand, but they don't realize that. Okay. And they're switching agencies they run ads, they're switching creatives, they're doing all this sort of stuff, but they're not actually solving the root cause. So what you have to do with your outreach is to connect for them the visible problem, ad costs are going up, with the actual cause and get them to see that connection. Because once that happens, it opens them up to consider branding and redoing their branding and working with your agency. So the way you can do that, for example, is say something like, you know how nowadays FMCG brands for CMOs, at the top of your mind, it's always the rising ad costs. Ever since COVID, a lot of brands are just moving 100% online, a lot more competition is driving costs up. Privacy changes are making it harder to target individually, and you have to do bulk level targeting. And everybody nowadays is using UGC creatives and influencers to promote their products. So it's very hard to stand out. But the real problem here is that there is no differentiation between your brand and other brands in the market. You all look the same. And research, in this case from McKinsey, proves that if you improve brand awareness by 50%, you end up with a 35% reduction in the cost of client acquisition. So can you see how here we've crafted a commercial narrative that explains exactly what their problem is, which they're aware of and they're experiencing, and how this is connected with the hidden cost that they're not aware of and that they're not exploiting, and where the agency can add value. It's stuff like this that I'm talking about that you need to do in your campaigns, and it's going to be very different from agency to agency. There's not like this is sort of the difficulty with doing outbound for agencies. It's not like you have a proven model that you take from one agency and then replicate to everybody else. It has to be fine tuned to exactly what you're doing.
That's interesting. So what, like if agencies are like, oh, I could just do this myself, or they, are looking at, other providers, or, a lot of times we get, messages, 10 times a day in our inbox or our LinkedIn box for outreach. What are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when
Mhm.
it comes to like cold outreach?
So yeah, I that's a very good question. And I think that to start with, and I know I want to pre-frame this by saying that I think that most agencies can't actually afford outreach. Funnily enough, I was having a call yesterday with an agency that reached out to us. And they were at around $200,000 a year in terms of revenue. And they wanted to work on outreach. And the first thing I told them, like, look, you're not going to be able to afford it because it doesn't make sense for you. And they're like, no, they were like, no, we can afford it, but it's just like, we don't want it to be too risky and this. And my point was like, look, you can't afford it. It's like saying that I can buy a Lamborghini and I can afford it. If I sell my house and I sell everything that I have,
Mhm.
then I can have it. Right? That doesn't mean that you can afford it. The guy who can afford the Lamborghini is the guy who can buy it. And if it gets destroyed or wrecked next week, he doesn't really care that much. That's the guy who can afford it. So I would say that agencies sub 1 million, they can't really afford to pay a provider to do it for them. And there are going to be a lot of people who offer it to such agencies. We covered sort of the human cost when it comes to doing outreach properly. They just would not be able to afford that. Would start at around 5,000 euros. So that's 5,000 to 6,000, let's say USD per month. And for most agencies that are below 1 million, it just doesn't make financial sense because they can't sustain the effort. Even if they get a client, it's still difficult for them to sustain because it's just a move that's too risky. It's them trying to live above their means. So
Mm,
agencies under 1 million, it's probably better to try to set an in-house system that does outreach for them. We work in that capacity with agencies as well, where we would coach them. We would give them the exact system. We would show them how to implement and how to run it with anywhere between 5 to 15 hours per week of work. Okay. And then they can source projects reliably, and they can use that system to scale the agency up to, let's say, around the 1 million mark. Once they get good at it and it works for their agency, they can obviously outsource it, get a VA and train them, for example, to do part of the work so they don't have to do the full work as founders. But initially they should, because they know their agency best. They know the type of value that their agency can add, and they need to figure out that commercial narrative. And the fastest way for them to do that is by getting hit with the market and trying to figure out the best way to position themselves and
mm.
to get deals. So with agencies sub 1 million, we tell them upfront, like, look, you can't actually afford to do this properly, so we don't recommend it to you. Instead, we offer to help them build an in-house system. And we're very good at what we do. So if they follow our instructions, it works, and it has worked so far in 100% of the cases without any exceptions. So we guarantee when we train them to do it, if they do it and they follow through, they will get results. When it's done for you, when we actually do the work for them, we only recommend that to bigger agencies because there's a bigger risk. Obviously, we can achieve much bigger scale, right, with a team
Mm.
than you can as one individual. But when you run a small agency, sub 1 million, you don't need a huge scale, to have a productive agency and to get clients consistently. You don't need that. I didn't need that when I was building my first agency. And I don't think anybody does, right? So it's more convenience. And as you said, the easy button that attracts people to work with these types of offers that they get. But I would say at their scale, it just doesn't make sense. And it's like they're seduced because the people who don't have, or when their skills are not so good, reach out to them and promise them those things. And then they don't deliver on them. And it's like they don't realize what they're doing wrong, but it's like they can't actually afford to spend the money that would be required to get a good result there. So, and even when they can, quote unquote, afford it, it feels too risky to them. And it is too risky,
Uh,
right? It's like not worth doing. Agencies after 1 million, of course, there's different problems there. The founder is sort of a bottleneck at that time. Then it makes sense to hire somebody like us to do it for them, because then they can scale beyond the founder and they have the resources.
Yeah, no, that's good to know, like, yeah, like what the fit is, and I think, yeah, giving a realistic picture. How about, what's, on average, by the time someone starts outreach to the time, like, they start to see deals close? I know that can be variable, but what's like setting realistic expectations? Because I think sometimes, whether it's the people who are pitching it or just out of desperation, you're like, "We wanna turn this thing on," and, like, we expect, like, deals to to be coming in next week. What's kind of a good healthy expectation?
I think it depends a lot on where you are. So when we work with agencies in done for you capacities, we always take them through a setup phase, which can be quite long, right? 1 month, maybe a bit more than 1 month. So the first thing we start with is like a 60-question questionnaire, everything about their agency. And it's like we look at how they think about their business, how they're growing their business, what they're doing, how they think about their clients, how they think about their target audience, how they think about their identity as an agency, all those factors, because outreach is a very downstream type of thing. And I give this example all the time. It's like, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we had this very large B2B SaaS organization from the US reach out to us. And when they came to us, they said, look, we know our target audience is this. We know this messaging works. This is what we need to send. We're looking for an outbound partner. We saw your cold email playbook. We grabbed that. We love what you're doing. We'd like to work with you. How can we start? Right. So that was the conversation. They were not worried about, when is a client going to sign up? When is this going to happen? They just didn't care about that. Okay. They're guys who can afford it and where it makes sense for them to do it. And for them, they would be able to see results very fast. So in the first week, maybe in the second week, they'd already be getting meetings, several of them being booked on their calendars. Obviously, depending on the deal size. So if you have $200,000 contracts normally, Obviously, you're not going to sign clients in a few months because your sales cycle is very long. So you're going to
Mhm.
meet the people, you're going to go on meetings and so on, but your deals are going to take longer to close. Now, the big problem with most agencies is that the strategy is not in place. So they don't know who they are as an agency. They don't know what their unique value is. Sometimes they don't even know what the target audience is. And they're like, we work with all sorts of companies. If they're in that place, right, you can't start turning outreach on and seeing results, right? Like, it's going to be a process. That's why we take them through that setup phase, which is a month or a bit longer than a month, so that we learn about them. We see if they have such issues. We can tell them. And then obviously they can choose to work on those issues themselves or work with us. But that sort of has to be fixed before we actually start outreach, because otherwise we're just wasting our time and we're not going to see results. So to summarize this, if the upstream strategy is already in place, they understand their positioning, their target audience, they have a message that resonates and all of that, results are fast, right? Days, weeks, you see results. But if that's not in there, then there needs to be a process to get that in place. And most agencies, frankly, don't have it, especially under the 1 million mark. I mean, that's why they're on.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good insights, especially I rarely hear people talking about like what you're describing here, just like what you need to be successful and, like when does it make sense to do done for you versus done with you, done with you or being coached in it. So this is really good. What trends are you leaning into here when you think of, where technology and marketing is heading and then how that interacts with like cold outreach?
I think that there is a move away from, frankly, AI in terms of messaging. There was a trend, and there were at some point, earlier, let's say 6 months back, AI was pretty successful in terms of using it in messaging. But nowadays, everybody is pretty much doing that, and people just want human connection. This is a big trend that we're seeing. For example, we had this, and it's a funny case. We had our team, our copywriting team, prepare some messaging for a client. They were an agency working with festivals, very niche type of audience, right? It's like only electronic type festivals around the world. And it's like we tested the messaging and the messaging didn't really hit. It was using copywriting best practices. It was doing everything that it should be doing, but it wasn't working. So they called me because, normally nowadays teams have account executives who manage them. When there's problems, they sort of call me. So they called me and they were like, okay, what should we do? Because look, they're not getting results here. What's going wrong? And I had a chat with the client and I was like, okay, let's write the message as you would be writing it, if you were speaking to that person. And they wrote it like that. And it was bad from a copywriting point of view, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You could tell that this was not a professionally crafted message. But that message worked about 5 times better than ours, and I ended up having a very successful campaign out of it because it was authentic, right? And somebody reading that could see, okay, this is a guy who has worked with festivals. Maybe he can help me, or it would be good to have him in my network. Let's speak with him. And that's sort of how it happened. And this, and I've noticed this across many different types of campaigns. It's like sometimes you don't even need that value proposition to connect with other people. You just need to connect in a human way, the way you would personally do it. And sometimes that works better. So I do think that there is definitely a move away from what AI can do towards stuff that only humans can do. And sometimes the stuff that humans can do is stupid on the surface, but stupid works.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, as like you were saying, like as there's more and more AI adoption and more of the communication is AI driven, like the human, even like you said, like not best practices, but actually what like a human
Yeah,
who's in that
exactly.
space is saying works. I think like, yeah, like I heard it, what we had a previous guest that talked about like being human powered and AI assisted. I think that is kind of what you're saying here.
That's a nice idea. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely this trend because, we have clients, for example, who call that AI slop. They're like, oh, we get so much AI
Mhm.
slop via email, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. If I look at my own mailbox, and the
Mhm.
funny thing is that, okay, so when we talk about personalization is important in outreach, right? And everybody knows about personalization. But nowadays with AI, people are interpreting personalization wrong, right? So if somebody says, I saw that you produced $20 million plus in sales for clients, for example, for me. And then they pitch me, let's say, getting me more clients as an example. And I have a lot of emails from other outreach companies doing that, for example. The problem with that is that the personalization has zero relevance to what they're pitching, right? So
Hmm.
personalization is very good. Like, obviously, I love to see that you looked into me. And because you looked into me, you actually have a valid reason for reaching out. Like, that works and that's powerful. But when you try to cheat, right, and sort of use AI to trick the person that you looked into them, what ends up happening is that there's no connection between the personalization and your value proposition. And at that point, when they're disconnected, it's like, okay, so what if you looked into me? Like, this doesn't seem relevant to me.
Hmm.
And it doesn't work.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'd like to ask a couple questions, like personally, as you run your agency and you've built agencies before. Like, what's one tool or piece of software that makes you more effective?
I mean, that's a very hard one because there's quite a few of them. I would say most of what we do in terms of me managing day-to-day tasks and stuff like that is built on top of Notion. We actually have a custom-made system that's built on top of Notion that includes our sales CRM, it includes our post-sales CRM, it includes project management tools, it includes
Mhm.
SOPs, documentation, and so on. So I would say Notion is probably the heart of our
Okay.
ecosystem. The other thing that we've done is we've invested a lot when it comes to building technology for automations using AI to help us. So for example, before calls, our sales team gets the AI to analyze their website and they receive sort of details about the client that they will be speaking with, right? And they can read a short brief about the client that they're about to meet. That obviously helps the sales process because they come in with a lot more context than, if you had to rely on them just doing it manually. It's stuff like that. We've actually been working on developing our own AI infrastructure in the background to actually automate these tasks.
Hmm.
And we've started deploying it in for some of our clients as well. It's a big help, for example, even for outreach. One of the biggest factors that we've seen has a huge positive correlation with success in terms of meetings booked is how fast you reply after somebody replies to you. Right. So let's say
Okay.
that you send out an email and you get a reply. How fast you reply to that person who replied to you is a huge factor that's positively correlated with them booking a meeting. So one of the things that we do nowadays for our SDR team is like when they get the reply, we have an AI system analyze the reply. We have the AI system categorize the reply. Is it positive? Is it negative? What's the subtext of
Mhm.
this reply and so on? The
Mhm.
information is sent to them and they also have a response crafted for them and prepared.
Mhm.
And they can pretty much just copy paste that response and use it. So it's stuff like that I think is in terms of tools is really valuable and it's a huge differentiator. So the core is
Awesome.
in Notion, but we have the AI system that's sort of sitting on top of it as a brain and moving things around.
Just a couple more questions. So, Tudor, what's been one book or mentor that has really impacted you?
I mean, as you can probably see behind me, I read a lot of books, so it's a very tough question for me. I'm not sure that I can, and honestly speaking, I'm not sure that I can pick one book because I've read so many and I took something from each one of them. And I think that every book that you read changes you in one way or another. Obviously, there have been a few that have been impactful, but it's like their influence is so mingled in with who I am today that it's very difficult for me to say. And I'm a big reader. I mean, I've read 2000 plus books so
Wow.
far in my
Okay.
life. So yeah, it's quite a lot, and that's sort of what makes it very tough for me to actually pick something. So yeah, I think that I won't because I feel that if I pick something, perhaps I'll do a discredit to someone because
Yeah.
it's not going to be the right.
Yeah.
What was the other part of the question?
Oh, yeah. Is there any like mentors that you've had along the way, or people that you learned from
Yeah.
that has
So
been
in terms
really
of
helpful to you?
mentors, I mean, I've worked with a lot of cool people in terms of agency owners and other business owners that I've learned a lot from. I would
Mhm.
say that perhaps I'm most thankful for our clients because that's where I've learned the most from. Aside from that, in terms of mentors, I mean, I've read a lot of books. So, there's a lot of people whose thoughts I've interacted with. Not everybody that I agree with, but I think that even those that you don't agree with, there's a lot to learn from them. So, for example, in the agency world, David Baker, you've probably heard of him. He's
Mhm.
somebody that I don't agree on or I don't see eye to eye on certain points. But, working against his thinking, so to speak, is like I've learned a lot.
Mhm.
And in terms of mentors business wise, one of the first books that I read about business was The Millionaire Fast Lane
Mm.
by MJ DeMarco. I think the system that that business gives in terms of thinking about what produces competitive advantage in a business, in terms of like you need to master scale, you need to get yourself out of the picture, master your time, you need to solve a need, you need to have barriers to entry or to create barriers to entry, and you need to have control of the mechanism. That's very useful. So, when people ask me what is Tanda about, especially for agencies, Tanda is about control. So agencies don't have control over their growth. That's the problem that Tanda and Outbound more specifically can solve. But for mentors, I would say that that has been impactful. I've moved away from what I've learned in that book in several important respects, but it's been a useful guidepost for me.
Awesome. And what's one piece of advice that you'd give agency founders listening right now, especially when they're thinking of like client acquisition?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that they can work on is their identity as an agency, because that's ultimately what creates competitive advantage. So if you think about the big boys, let's call them in the agency world, companies like Pentagram, Aqua, and so on, these are very famous in the branding and design space. What's distinctive about them is that they have a certain style, right? And when you open up their website, when you look at their work, you can recognize this work was created by that agency pretty much just by seeing the work.
Hmm.
Most agencies are not really focusing on their core identity, and they're not really allowing their identity to drive their decision making. I say this to people all the time, but stuff like Outbound is very downstream. Identity is sort of at the top, and from identity flows purpose. And from purpose flows the rest of business strategy, positioning, and so on. And from that flows Outbound and the rest of the marketing tactics, let's say. I would say that as founders, the most important thing to work on is to be in touch and in alignment with your identity. And what that means is that the decisions you take, for example, with regards to your marketing, are aligned with that. So just recently, we were working with an agency client, and their identity is, and it shines through, for example, in the way they design stuff, in the way they do things, is saying no to authority, it's being independent, it's being bold, right? But then when it comes to their marketing, they're going after the most authoritative companies in the world, like big banks and stuff like that. That's not really aligned, right? So one thing there is going off. So either the identity is aspirational, it's who they wish to be, but they don't really have the courage to be and to step into that. Or it's the other way around. Their identity is real, but their reality, the way they're actually enacting that identity is not aligned.
Mm.
And that creates a problem because you think that people don't notice it and clients don't notice it, but they do, right? And ultimately, that's the only way you can create competitive advantage for your agency. Be unique and be yourself and let that shine through. And I think that that's the ultimate advantage because nobody can be you.
Yeah.
Everybody else can be themselves and they can have skills and they can be that, but the style that you have is going to be unique to you. And if you can build your agency around that in a certain style that you stand for and a certain identity, I think you're going to be very successful. And I didn't
Uh,
know this, when I started my first agency, I was in it for the money and I didn't realize that purpose and identity and these things are so valuable, and over time I got into meditation, mindfulness, other types of things, and my thinking started to shift and I started to see how those deeper things actually are more important in business. Because if you think about it, it's like nobody's going to pay you because you want to make a lot of money. That's not why somebody's going to give you willingly their money.
mm.
And capitalism is about people willingly giving you their money. And the only reason they're willingly going to give you their money is because you solve a problem for them. And the problem that you solve, that's your purpose as a company. So in our case, our purpose is giving agencies control, right? So lack of control is the problem that we solve. In this case, we solve it regarding growth. But obviously, at some point, we could move beyond that and solve it with other aspects like operations and so on.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I like that alignment and congruence piece.
Yeah.
That's huge. So, where is the best place online to learn more about you and your agency?
I mean, people can connect with me on LinkedIn. So I would say my LinkedIn is probably the best way to just get in touch with me. In terms of learning more about us, they can go to our website, tanda.digital. They will find a lot of resources there. We have a course for people who want to start agencies. They're sort of at the very beginning stages. There's the Done With You program. They can reach out to our team and speak to us about that. Or obviously, if they're above $1 million and above, they can work with us directly. Or if they're not sure, they can just speak with us and we can advise them. We have a lot of resources, playbooks, lead magnets, and so on that they can access on our website, including tools that they can use. So, for example, we have a spam risk analyzer on our website. They can post in their email and it can tell them if this is spam or not, or it's not going to be flagged as spam by ESPs. There's a lot of stuff like that. But I would say that the website is the center hub. And aside from that, I would definitely recommend that people check out our industrial scale cold email playbook, which is available for free on our website, because we've done a lot of work that's very advanced and very special for the outbound field. And if people want to learn what that looks like, that's the best place to do it, because we actually show the results we got for all our clients. We show how we work on things. We show our exact methodology. So to speak, it's a tour of the factory, right? If you think about TANDA Digital as a factory, it's a tour of the factory, how we do every bit of work that we actually do.
Awesome. Well, Tudor, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing all these great insights into an area that a lot of times people aren't really there. They're not talking about these things. So thanks so much for being on.
It's my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone tuning in from the gym, in your car, or at your desk, thanks for joining us. And if this episode was helpful for you, be sure to subscribe and share it with another agency founder who can benefit from it. Because agencies don't rise alone, they rise together. This is AgencyRise.